Welcome to my visual presentation. Today I'm going to be focusing on nonverbal communication and its relation to facial expression. So to begin, let's talk a little bit about why facial expression is so important. Facial expressions give human beings the ability to convey a countless number of emotions without actually having to verbalize their feelings. The most commonly used and understood facial expressions are anger, happiness, sadness, surprise, fear, and disgust. What's really unique about facial expression in terms of communication is that it is the one language that is understood across cultures. Facial expression can become a little bit tricky when it is misunderstood or miscommunicated. In a journal article by Stephen Porter titled Reading Between the Lies, the author talks a lot about how facial expressions, when they don't match a situation, can be interpreted as the sender is lying or being dishonest because there's that awkward disconnect about what's being said and what is visually being portrayed. So, facial expressions are often what form people's first impressions of us. They can be voluntary or involuntary. An example of a voluntary facial expression would be smiling for a photo, and an involuntary facial expression would be when you hear something you dislike and your face shows your dislike in what you've heard or seen. So, Burgoon, Giero, and Floyd talk a lot about micro expressions and how understanding and noticing micro expressions help to improve your overall communication as well as strengthen your emotional intelligence. And micro expressions are those small and subtle expressions that are commonly missed and not recognized, but can be really telling about the sender's true feelings. So there's a journal article by Fraser Smith called Smile Through Your Fear and Sadness. And in this article, he talks about the go-to expressions. So some people have expressions that they feel most comfortable displaying. He talks about smiling as a go-to expression and how using smiling as that go-to can really be deceiving and confusing to receivers. Because when we see somebody smiling, we assume that they're happy or excited. Um, but people who use smiling as a go-to expression often do it because they're hiding feelings of nervousness or sadness and either don't feel comfortable displaying those emotions or don't necessarily want to explain what's going on that has them feeling those emotions. So, the reason I want to improve on my facial expressions is because I've found myself in situations where I either offend somebody based on my emotional expression or my facial expressions, or I give people the impression that I'm uninterested or disagree with what they're saying. Because when I'm listening, I tend to raise one of my eyebrows, and this comes off to people as maybe judgment or dislike, when really that is not a true representation of how I feel. I also struggle with masking my feelings, especially with frustration or dislike. You can tell those emotions that I'm feeling because they are literally written on my face. So I have a really hard time masking those emotions, and it's not always appropriate to let people know that I am frustrated or disagree with them. Specifically in professional settings, I want to improve my facial expressions because I don't want to be perceived as something I'm not, such as arrogant or entitled, which my resting face can sometimes give the impression that I'm uninterested or have something better to do, just not the most pleasant facial expressions. So, by improving my ability to manage my emotional expression and how my facial expression coincides with my feelings or the situation, I think I'll become a stronger communicator overall. Here I have a short slide talking about decoding micro expressions, but for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and continue to the next slide. So, when researching ways to improve facial expression and emotional expression in general when it comes to communication, there's a lot of advice about having a higher amount of situational awareness and using other people or another person to gauge how expressive to be and kind of the appropriateness of what emotion you're sending. I also thought it was interesting the use of eye contact to convey facial expression. By making eye contact with others during a conversation, you're forced to pay more attention to their facial expression, which can then be telling in how you then portray your own emotions and the facial expressions that you have. So, some questions for you all. Do you value facial expressions in forming first impressions of others? How do you manage your involuntary facial expressions? And how do you ensure that your facial expressions reflect your true emotions? I appreciate you taking your time to watch this, and I look forward to hearing back from you. Thank you.